Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So this evening, we're on our second message for Romans. I did the first one last week. Hopefully in the YouTube edit, we'll put a link somewhere, like, I don't know, point somewhere, and it'll go there. That'd be neat. You see that on YouTube videos all the time. So last week we were talking about justification by faith and understanding that the old law is very much likened to the old man, and the new man is the new law. And I think I enjoyed that one pretty well. I got some comments on it, and it was nice to do that one. I hadn't ever read through Romans much, so it was eye-opening to just see kind of what I already knew, but see it again, fresh. Tonight I wanted to touch on the second subject. I'm just kind of doing themes. I'm not actually doing, like, going through the entire book of Romans in 3 messages, because that would be a lot of cramming. That would be way too much. So the second theme we're going for tonight is called reasonable service. What is reasonable service? What does it look like? What does it mean? What does it mean for us? What did it mean for the church in Rome? Because obviously this letter was written to the church in Rome. That's why they call it Romans. So we're going to start in chapter 12, verse 1. Chapter 12 of Romans, in verse 1, it says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And I thought that was just, it seemed very strange to call it reasonable. I guess in a carnal mind, in a worldly mindset, it would be very strange to say that submitting yourself as a living sacrifice would be reasonable. So living sacrifices, that's what we're called to be. I remember we talked about the old mindset of the Jews and the old covenant and the law of works. And the sacrifice was a pretty big chunk of those laws, right? I mean, there's different things you sacrifice, there's different parts that you sacrifice, there's different times, celebrations, there's always a rule for it. So Paul brings up this old law, and instead of offering up livestock, we're offering up ourselves. Instead of physically laying on the altar for sacrifice, he calls us to be living sacrifices spiritually. This is the spiritual annotation on that. Because the old law of works was likened to death, the new law of faith and grace is likened to life everlasting. Spiritually, we are laying ourselves on the altar. If we look back a little bit in Romans 6, in 6:6, actually, I remember Pastor Frank talking about this a lot, and it was very exciting to listen to him talk about it. Was Romans 6:6, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, and henceforth we should not serve sin. So I thought that was interesting. It's, we say that Christ sacrificed himself on the cross. So naturally, we are also sacrificing ourselves with Christ on that cross. But it's not us, it's our sin nature. It's our old man. And Aunt Jane just mentioned before service that I was starting to get more distinguished with the grays. So I'm feeling like the old man now. That and my son got into 5th grade. Yesterday was his first day, and I was like, 5th grade though? I still remember when I was in 5th grade. Wasn't that long ago, was it? I graduated in 2004, so you do the math. So the 2 things we've listed here in verse 1 of chapter 12. We need to be holy. Holy meaning sacred, morally blameless. In other words, we need to be saintly. That's a good word for it. We need to be saintly. We need to be acceptable. To be acceptable means that we need to be fully agreeable. In order to be a living sacrifice, we must do these two very impossible things. So how are we supposed to do that? How are we supposed to be holy and acceptable? It's nothing that we can do by ourselves, obviously. Nothing I could do I'd ever come close. All God asks is that we look to him in prayer and seeking. We submit ourselves to his leading. And like I said last week, we must begin to accept the gospel as the new faith, as the new law of faith, I should say. And accepting that faith, the old sin, the nature of man, must die so that Christ may live. So this is where we start with our sacrifice. Remember, and this is going kind of back into the old law of what sacrifices were. They were very, like I said, large part of the Jewish faith. Much of Levitical laws had to do with that sacrifice. And the very first sacrifice, I just wanted to touch on that. Where was the very first sacrifice in the Bible? Well, it's a good chance that it was in Genesis. But how early in Genesis was it? And this one I was thinking like, well, who was the first one to build an altar? Who was the first one to... No, it wasn't that one. It actually wasn't and maybe this is just my perspective, and if Pastor sees this later, he can correct me. He's traveling this evening, but I think it was Genesis 3:21 was the first sacrifice. And that seems very early in the book, doesn't it? Unto Adam also, and to his wife, did the Lord make coats of skins and clothed them. Something had to die for our sins. That was right there. Right there. Something had to die for us because we messed up as a species, as a race, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't set into law just yet. But this is what God chose to do for us. And I forgot the thing I was going to bring. It was a fig leaf. I have a fig bush in my backyard. I was going to bring a fig leaf to show you how useless those things really are for covering something, because they're probably about this wide, but they go this way and this way. So there's these big gaping holes here. There's just, you can't do anything with them. Fruit's pretty good though. I'm really hoping to get some this year. We had too long of a cold spell at the end of spring, so we might get some figs. I might bring them in. Who knows? I'm not speaking next week, so we still got a chance. I think it was supposed to be warm this weekend, so maybe we'll get it. Plants were not a very good sacrifice. We also see that in Cain and Abel. That's kind of it feels like kind of a setup for the next story in Genesis. And I also said that's why steak tastes so much better than vegetables. Like, yeah, you can have the beans or the asparagus or whatever with the steak, but you still have the steak. It's a steak dinner. It's not an asparagus dinner. So, how do we begin to be a living sacrifice? And actually, Paul seems to kind of answer this one or give us a clue as to what to do next in the very next verse in chapter 12. So, chapter 12, verse 2, we see it says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." So there's that word acceptable again. So this is a hint as to the direction we need to move first. We don't fashion ourselves to the world. This world is not our home. We are. There's an album that Johnny Cash did. It was My Mother's Hymn Book, and I like listening to that one. That's very good. And one of the songs is, "I am a pilgrim, I am a stranger, traveling through this wearisome world. I have a home. on the other side of the Jordan. I don't remember the exact lyrics, but it's a fun song to listen to. I enjoy it very much. So we're not fashioning ourselves this world. We're renewing our minds. This is to take a divine thought process and use it. Proving that which is good. So this one, the story that popped up for me was a few years back. I was driving for Uber in the car that I didn't get to really keep today. Well, I have it still, but the inspection's not gonna stick this next year, so I've got to find another car. But I was driving the Prius around for Uber and just making a couple extra bucks on the side, and then pretty much just putting it back in the gas tank. It wasn't really worth it. I picked up 3 guys over by the airport, drove them into town, and they asked about church, and we started talking a lot about faith and religion, and I said, I'm not super eloquent on how to say it, but I go to a Pentecostal church, this is what we believe. And they kind of just sat and nodded along, was like, okay. And then one of the guys started talking about the new heaven and the new earth, and I really don't want to get into that because it is so, how do I want to say this? I didn't catch it at first. I could feel that there was something off about what they were saying, as I had never heard it before. And they were talking about how they wanted to live on the new earth. And I'm like, okay. And at the end of the ride, the oldest man hands me the business card, Jehovah's Witness. I said, okay, there it is. Figured it out. Just like that, I knew there was something wrong, and I was correct. So, and I think there was a story that Pastor Bailey's wife was working at the bank where she got the silver coin and had to listen to that one silver coin over and over and over so you could spot the false every time because it doesn't sound like the real thing, and this was not ringing true. They talked about living on a new earth, and I said, when they were gone, I was processing, and I said, I don't want to live anywhere but as close as I can get to my Father, God. I want to live as close as He will allow me to be. That's where I want to go. Wherever He wants me to be, that's where I am. And I wish I could have told it to them just to say, no, that doesn't sound right. Something's wrong with that. And you need to check your text and check the right text. I don't know. But everybody's put in my path for a reason. I thought that it made for a good illustration, if anything, if nothing else. So, pastor's notes, like I mentioned last week, I have those. He sent them to me to go through some themes. He said in his notes, this begins by a renewing of the mind. When our head is on the altar, we can then be motivated by divine thoughts. And I thank God for those divine thoughts. I'm starting to feel like our thoughts in this world are becoming more and more like the days of Noah in Genesis. And you don't have to turn there. It's Genesis 6:5. God saw that the wickedness of men was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And I don't always recommend it, but you could turn on the news and just be fooled by all the terrible things going on. That's all they talk about is just all the bad things. And it's funny because they tell you all about all the bad things. There's worse things that they're not talking about. That's why you vary your sources if you're going to research something, right? So this is why Paul tells us we need to renew our minds, continuing our thoughts on the subject of sacrifice, though we're going to go back to that briefly here. Who made sacrifices in the old law? What person in the Jewish community was the one doing the sacrifice at the temple? It was the priests, right? The Levites. Hebrews 7:12 says, for the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. So the priesthood is changed from a specific group to everybody. We are a priesthood. Paul tells the Hebrews that the priesthood and the roles have been changed, and therefore the law has also been changed. What is one of the most important things about sacrifice? It has to cost something. Even back in Genesis, when God made those animal skins for Adam and Eve, the animals had to die. And they didn't deserve it. We were the sinner, not the animals. But their blood was spilled because of Adam and Eve's sins. It's reasonable to say that the higher the cost of the thing you sacrifice, the greater the benefit you could expect, not must, but could expect to receive back, but not, like I said, not all the time. Sometimes we sacrifice things because God tells us to, and even if we don't see the increase or the benefit immediately, it's still there. It could be a heavenly benefit. So I'm not saying, and some of the things we're giving up, they're almost never going to be, you should give up going to church. That's not a good idea. But if you're giving up drinking, or you're giving up smoking, or you're giving up watching movies, or if God's calling you to do that thing and you do that thing, there is a benefit. There is a reason He's asking you to stop doing the thing that you were okay with doing. And I was actually reading a little bit farther into Romans, and there was a lot of talking about not holding another man to your convictions. I think it was based a lot off of eating things. So I might be looking into that one over the next couple weeks here before my next message. So I'm just going to read real quick through. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, I'm going to read real quick through Hebrews 10:5 through 10:10. And this is back to concerning the priesthood. I'm sorry, my notes must have jumped around a little bit here. So I am jumping around a little bit as well. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, that's he being Jesus, saith, Sacrifice and offering thou wouldst not, but a body thou hast prepared me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin thou hast had no pleasure. Then I said, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. And there's a big parenthesis in there. Verse 8, above when he said, Sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offerings for sin thou wouldst not offer, neither hast pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. So he's back to talking about the old law. He said, I follow the law. Then he said, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that he may establish the second. And I really, that rings back to Pilgrim's Progress with, I believe it was Patience and I can't remember the one that wanted everything now and the one that could wait. Passion. That was it. Yes. And it was, the first got his, relished in it and pointed and laughed at the other, and then when it all ran out, the second got his, and it was never ending. Let's see, back to Hebrews 10:10. That was a little side note there. By which we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. So we are sanctified through the sacrifice of Christ. Therefore, we sacrifice ourselves living to continue that sacrifice, to continue that work. Christ became the sacrifice that was offered up. A body thou hast prepared me. Christ embodies that priesthood to which we are called. We are called to reign in life. We are also called to offer up our lives. Because Christ did the final physical offering, we are called to spiritually offer up our lives. And like Pastor said in his notes, the head was the first thing to go to the altar. And this is why Paul starts with renewing of the mind. You may ask, what about the rest of the body? Well, where the head goes, the body will follow. I've actually been watching my daughter start to try to walk on her hands and do cartwheels and somersaults, and she's becoming a little gymnast. But if you've ever seen someone do a flip, part of the way they train it is that they have to, once they get their feet underneath them, they get their head upright, their feet will automatically go underneath them. So when you focus more on the position of this, everything else will land in the direction that your head is. I always thought that was kind of interesting. I'm not going to try to do a flip for you to demonstrate that either. It's not going to happen. So Paul continues, verse 4 of chapter 12 in Romans. We talk about the spiritual body of the church being the body and the members all playing a part in that body. So Romans 12, 4 and 5 we're looking at. Romans 12, 4 and 5. For as we have many members in one body, all members have not the same office. So we, being many, are one body in Christ, and every one members of another, one of another. In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, he compares the subject of the gifts in ministry to the human body. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you want to reference it, put it in notes, whatever you're taking down. 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. There is no part of a body that is not essential. A couple of years ago, I had my gallbladder out, as most of you probably know. I can tend to miss that sometimes. When it was working, I enjoyed having it, I'll say, because when it stopped working at the end there, it was not fun. So every part of the human body makes a complete whole. That's with a W, whole. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't born without hearing or without sight. I think it's very interesting to see how well God designed us to be adaptable to things like that. So when one sense is missing, the other senses ramp up and help take over its place. Unfortunately, the same in our church currently. It's the same in the church here because currently we're working at a very low tide and very low membership. It makes things a little bit harder, but we persevere. Reading more about the comparison, we understand that we need to be a complete body. And this is my little side rant. I actually typed this part out, so I'm going to just read it. It blows my mind that there are people in this world who are not only willing to remove healthy body parts, but they tell everyone that it should be celebrated. This is not a political statement as much as it is a moral statement. If you say, oh, don't get so political, well, stop making your immorality into politics. Just because what I say is righteous and correct does not mean I will be relegated to these four walls in saying it. You could go to the doctors and say, oh, I don't like my left arm. I like my left arm very much, actually, seeing as I am left-handed. And it's okay to be left-handed. Look up Judges. The guy's name is Ehud. And I remember that because I've had people ask me, do you ever get your hand hit with a ruler or whatever because you're writing with the wrong hand? No, I never went to a Catholic school. But I made sure to look it up. It's Ehud. He was left-handed. And he was a judge. So he was appointed by God. So left-handedness, not all that bad. But so you go to the doctor and say, oh, I need to cut my left hand off. I need to cut my left hand off. I don't like it. It doesn't belong here. Like, what's it doing? The doctor would think you're crazy. Why would you remove a healthy body part? But you go to that same doctor and you say, well, I'm the opposite gender now. Okay. Like, really? I was listening to a podcast. They were talking about that. The lady was actually one of the ones who pioneered treatment for gender dysphoria. And she prescribed in her scientific findings or whatever, that over the course of 3 years, you should monitor the patient, understand their mentality of it, and then if it continues to persist, then after 3 years, 3 years is a long time to consider a medical procedure. Now they've cut it back so far, you could have a 3-minute telephone conversation with a doctor, video conversation even, with a doctor, and get a prescription to start your transition that day. And that's horrible. That's so immoral. Like I said, it's not political. It's simply not. I'm saying it's wrong. There is no part in this church that is not essential. Everyone here plays a part. From our youngest member to our oldest. My mom told me last year that my grandmother actually asked her, "Why am I still here?" And it's like, she's 96. Her heart is failing. If she makes it to the end of this year, I will be amazed. But, how do you answer that question? Why am I still here? And the answer that my mom had, I'm crying now, the answer that my mom had was, you're our prayer warrior. You are the one holding this family together with prayer. Sorry, I did not think I was going to get this bad. You will never convince me that there is a useless person, that everyone has a purpose. So, when I hear suicide rates and end-of-life care and things going on up in Canada where it's like they're helping people die early. Like, it's so disheartening. As far as purpose in life and touching on that, the quote C.S. Lewis had in the problem of pain was, "For you will certainly carry out God's purpose, however you act, but it makes a difference to you whether you serve like Judas or like John." So I'm going to close that part of the message. I made it through that just barely. Romans 12:6. We're moving on here. Romans 12:6, and I'm actually going to read 6, 7, and 8 all in one chunk here. So, verse 6: "Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith." Verse 7: "Our ministry, let us wait on our ministering, or he that teacheth on teaching." Verse 8: "So that he that exhorteth on exhortation, let he that giveth, let him do it with simplicity." My goodness, I'm stumbling here. "He that ruleth with diligence, and he that showeth mercy with cheerfulness." So he lists out, I'm just going to buzz through that again real quick: prophecy, ministry, teaching, exhortation, that's someone who consoles or comforts, giving, that is in time or food or ability, rulers, and showing mercy. So that's 7 different ways we can take care of each other in a church body. Each one of these gifts differ according to the grace given to us. And I find that very interesting because I might be good at some of those and I might be pretty awful at other ones, but my heart's in it, I'm trying, right? But other people naturally are more caring, more giving. I have certain skill sets that some people don't, and that's okay, because they certainly can do a lot of things that I can't. So what Pastor brings out, and what I agreed, and I really wanted to read this part because it it was very interesting, especially over this last week. It's important to exercise these gifts like a muscle. And I had missed an entire week of martial arts class, and I think my body's gotten used to that twice a week stretch. And boy, yesterday was kind of rough. Stretching out again. I was like, wow, I haven't done this in a week. It could be even worse if I took a month off, God gave us these gifts for a reason. We should use them to glorify Him. That's what they're there for, right? I've worked with people, all they do all day is cut pipe, weld, braze, solder. Their mind when it comes to cutting pipes is just amazing. They can see it all laid out and then they build it. It's really cool to see. Then comes the day they have to remember how to and I write it in here. I'm such a nerd. They have to remember how to calculate the subcooling to put the refrigerant into the system. No, don't worry about that. That's what I'm there for anyways, because I actually remember that stuff because I just went to school for it. But you see, I've watched this last month. I watched how they had to calculate how much refrigerant to put into a system they just built. And they're like, oh, I haven't done this in school. And it's been, a couple of years since I've done any refrigeration. It's like, okay, You see that the gears turning. It's very interesting because they still know it. It's still there. It just has to come out. So it's that, I guess what I'm saying is it's that mind muscle. It's using that part of you again and again and again to get that repetition in and not lose it. So, teachers have to study if they're going to teach. Like I have to really read into this and look up things, and I have to take time with it that I don't normally take time with. Doctors and lawyers have to continue to learn the latest studies and laws that they can keep up with what's expected of them. How much more do we as Christians have to continue to read our Bible in order to be able to respond to that coworker that has questions, or even to keep our the old man that we need to keep him in check. We need to keep him down. He's the one who needs to die. And boy, he really wants to come out sometimes, doesn't he? He just, somebody cuts you off in traffic or any of the smallest slights, and he wants to be the one that comes out and responds for you. And it's like, no. You sit in the corner and you stay quiet because that's where you belong until it's time to go. In so many words, it's time to go. So to recap, this is going to be the end of it here. I asked a few questions at the beginning. What is reasonable service? It is putting our head spiritually on the altar, allowing God to take control and guide our thoughts. And that's really, it's so hard to state where the basic start of it is because there's a lot to it. And I'm not always good at getting into finer beginner's details, so I apologize for that. What does it look like? What does reasonable service look like? It looks like what you'd expect to see in other people treating you kindly. It looks like a functioning body that's able to support itself as a community of believers takes care of its members, where the sum of all of our parts are greater as a whole church. What does it mean for us? What did it mean for Rome? It means the same for both, honestly. Because we are small, it can be a lot harder sometimes, and sometimes happens a lot more times than most. I like to work in the sound booth, and I like that sometimes people forget I'm up there. I think the only person who remembers Rebecca's there is because I've looked up at her a couple times. It means things are running smoothly. You didn't hear any feedback. Nobody's, the slides went well for worship service. You forget they're up there, they've done their job. That's, at least in my mind, that's how I want to be thought of. Just, oh yeah, I wondered where Jeff was. He's up there. But, I can't do it myself all the time. Rebecca can't do it herself all the time. Frank can't do it every time he's traveling. We all take a turn. And I'm being very specific with the sound booth because that's where I operate best. I couldn't speak for the ministry team up front. I couldn't speak for how Carl's able to do it all by himself all the time. He's a hard-working man. But we have each other to the degree that we check in with each other. We receive exhortation. We receive correction. We receive, what did Josiah say earlier? Reprove. It reminded me of the other verse. I can't remember what book it was in now. There's my Bible studies there. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort. It's listed in one of the, and I did a message on it too, and I still don't remember where it was. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort, and that's what we're here for each other. That's what we are meant to do for each other, is to help each other in our function as part of this church. And I did mention the worship team and Sunday school for my kids as well as the Baldwin kids. Just, it might not always be the most well-oiled machine, but we're doing pretty darn good if you ask me. Amen.